start by thanking the organizers for making me a member of this panel and to give me an opportunity to talk about a peacekeeping operation that had a lot of positive in comments after it happened, and that is the peacekeeping operations in Sierra Leone. And I wanted to look at this in terms of looking at what happened in terms of UNAMSIL in Sierra Leone, and also as a sequence to that, to look at to bring to the fore human rights issues also, because it was extremely important in the operations of UNAMSIL in Sierra Leone, and also how these human rights concerns could be taken into account both now in peacekeeping operations and also in terms of looking at the implications of COVID-19. Now, the UNAMSIL was instituted in 2007. In 1999. In 1999, it was just after the UN experience of peacekeeping in Rwanda. And for the first time, or maybe for one of the first times, human rights issues were drawn into the mandate of UNAMSIL. It's specifically stated in the Security Council Resolution 1270 to ensure security and protection of human rights, and included inter alia respect for human rights. And another resolution on UNAMSIL also established it as a force established to ensure the rule of law and protection of human rights in Sierra Leone. Now, what did the mission do that became very effective? First of all, it set up Human Rights Committee made of Sierra Leoneans and pro-democracy institutions, as well as in most of the country's district, it trained local human rights advocates who in turn trained human rights monitors and activists. In addition to training, the activities of UNAMSIL itself address civil, political, economic, and social rights. So it was not a peacekeeping operation in which the main thrust was on monitoring and observing, but actually being involved in the looking at human rights issues and in addressing human rights issues. So in addition to looking at the civil and political rights, disarming tens of thousands of fighters, assisting in holding national elections, disarmament and demobilization of soldiers, and assisting in the voluntary return of more than 500,000 refugees and internally displaced persons, and the training of thousands of police personnel, and the construction and reconstruction of dozens of police stations. It also addressed some issues relating to economic and social rights. It contributed towards the rehabilitation of infrastructure and bringing government services to local communities. It also helped the government restore its authority and social services in areas previously controlled by rebels. UNAMSIL assisted the government in setting up a Truth and Reconciliation Commission tasked with healing the wounds of war by bringing together perpetrators and by bringing together perpetrators and victims of atrocities, and also worked with UN agencies to implement quick impact and income generating projects to provide jobs to thousands of unemployed youths and ex-fighters and basic services to local communities. In 2007, UNAMSIL was replaced by UNIOSIL, which was given a mandate particularly to help consolidate peace in the country and also to cement UNAMSIL's gain and to help governments strengthen human rights and realize the Millennium Development Goals and improve transparency and hold free and fair elections. So basically, UNAMSIL was one of the first missions, peace missions, that really went beyond the goal of monitoring and of peace agreements, but also in terms of getting involvement in addressing human rights issues, be they civil and political and economic and political rights. The interesting thing about this that it happened in the late 90s and early 2000s is that it set a pace. When Ban Ki-moon went to end the operations, he hailed the experience in Sierra Leone as indeed one of the success story of peacekeeping, and could be a model for successful peacekeeping. Following that, many of the peacekeeping operations, of course, had elements of what were clear in UNAMSIL as part of it. Now, basically, if we look at these operations and how the operations of this type are affected by COVID-19, we could see that in the light of COVID-19, many of these things, operations that are done by the peacekeeping structure, can also be affected, and some of the means of addressing them, if we look at, and I'm looking at this, I'm looking clearly putting focus on human rights issues. If we look at human rights issues and training, for instance, reaching remote communities, having to deal with that in the light of restriction of movement, where technology would come in, the need to look at technologies, and I think the next speaker will be talking at technologies, to look at technologies that can facilitate training on human rights issues while remotely, so that, you know, there's not that movement required to go and train people. Also, the use of e-payment for transfer of funds to support human rights activities in remote locations, and the use of satellite communications to transmit messages and training. One could see concessions from satellite operators. Another thing that could happen would be the working with regional and sub-regional groups. And I think the previous speaker referred to this. UNAMSIL set the pace in terms of UN peace operations working with a sub-regional group, ECOWAS. And this is something which should be looked at more clearly in post-COVID, because that would avoid duplication of efforts and reduce the cost of operations. Now, the peacekeeping in Sierra Leone revealed the importance of the human rights approach to address inequalities in economic and social rights, and the need to build back better. Now, looking at what transformational change could be achieved post-COVID, I looked at this in relation to the whole question of prevention. And excuse me, because I've been working on prevention and I thought it was very valid at this point. It's perhaps a coincidence that COVID-19 came when the whole focus of the Secretary General and the United Nations itself is being channeled towards prevention. And also looking at it in terms of looking at prevention also outside the whole scope of looking at the UN in entirety, looking at all the pillars of the United Nations, and how could prevention assist in a period of post-COVID, where the resources, as has been stressed, the resources to peacekeeping operation might not be as forthcoming as it used to be. And for me, this gives us the opportunity to, at last in the UN, take prevention seriously. There has been a lot of lip service to prevention. Every new Secretary General comes and talks about prevention, and everybody says, yes, prevention is better than cure, we all know it. But then what steps are definitely taken by the UN system itself to prevent conflicts in the first place, which would necessitate the need for peacekeeping operations. And basically, what I looked at recently is looking at how prevention could start before countries actually fall into conflict situations. And there we would see that there are many things which would need to be done. And maybe the transformation that we would need after COVID-19 and reduce funding for peacekeeping operations, the major transformation would be a refocus of the attention United system itself on prevention, and starting from human rights prevention, because that's where it all starts. all the conflicts start with initial violation of human rights. It then goes on and on unnoticed until it gets to the point of conflict, and then all the mechanisms of the UN come together to react to it. So the point I'm saying here is that this gives us the opportunity to look at a transformation of the whole system, not just at peacekeeping operations, because this transformation would necessitate us looking more clearly at what prevention could be done. I mean, some of the things which came out of the study which we did recently is that, first of all, there would be a need for greater participation of human rights mechanisms and human rights advisors at in country teams, as foreseen in the Secretary General's call to action on human rights. And also that in the reviews that the Human Rights Council does of all states, where the recommendations present a compendium of clearly identifiable actions to be taken to address human rights issues, assistance needs to be provided wherever needed to implement these recommendations. Also, greater efforts for the Human Rights Council to conform to paragraph 5F of the General Assembly resolution, which established the Council itself, namely that the Council should contribute through dialogue and cooperation towards the prevention of human rights violations and respond promptly to human rights emergencies. If we think that prevention is expensive, then think about the cost of non-prevention. Indeed, a study by the Universal Rights Group this year revealed that a UN prevention strategy that emphasizes primary and secondary prevention with the central and integrated involvement of the human rights pillar could save the states and the international community billions of dollars and made the economic case for prevention. So I'm sorry if I drifted out, but because I feel that when we are looking at these things, we have to go beyond and look at the UN as a system. And because if we're now talking about, let us try to work with less resources, then shouldn't we be looking at prevention so we do not have to have many more peacekeeping missions that are necessary? Thank you, I'll end there.